Hello, my name is Zania Reynolds, and this is my end of the year semester portfolio. Portfolio 1. What I learned was experimental study and correlation study. Experimental study is doing an actual experiment to test your hypothesis. Correlation study is using research from the past to support your hypothesis. My biggest takeaway for this chapter is correlational study. I knew a lot about experimental study, but I never knew about correlation. I never knew that there was a study that you could do without actually experimenting. Experimental and correlational study are easy to get confused, but this project helped me understand the difference between them and learn more about correlation, such as using someone else's experiment with giving them credit and using the information to support your hypothesis. Project 2. What I learned is that sensation is our senses: sight, smell, taste, touch, and sound. And we take them into a process of perception in which the brain selects, organizes, and interprets these sensations. My biggest takeaway from this project was how sight got converted to our brains. I learned that when using sight when learning, it is converted into electrical signals carrying neurons that go to the brain to make you write what you just seen. Another takeaway I learned was how sensation and perception are used together but are different. Sensation is the physiological basis of perception, but perception is the actual process our senses take in. These are my biggest takeaways because I did not know how our senses worked, and I learned so much about perception. Portfolio 3. What I learned was learning is a permanent change in our knowledge or behavior when experienced. Associative learning occurs when an organism has connections between events together in the environment and is central to all three basic learning processes: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Classical conditioning is when an organism learns to associate events that happen over and over again. Operant conditioning is when we learn to associate events with their reinforcement or punishment. Observational learning is learning by observing others or things. My biggest takeaways from this project was learning about classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Out of all three of these, observational learning was the easiest to learn. This is because it's in the name. But what made me learn the most was classical conditioning. This was because we had to figure out the unconditioned stimulus and conditioned stimulus, as well as the unconditioned response and the conditioned response. Portfolio 4. Memory. What I learned was memory is a set of processes used to encode, store, and retrieve information over different periods of time. Encoding is information that is inputted into the memory system. Storing is permanent information that is recorded, and retrieval is information that comes back from your memory storage. My biggest takeaway from this project was using what I did that day and understand what memory I used. This was my biggest takeaway because I learned the different types of memory more and learned how I can use them in my everyday life, as well as know what part of the brain uses this memory. Portfolio 5. What I learned was motivation is the wants or needs that direct behavior toward a goal. Motivations can be intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic are from the internal factors, and extrinsic is from your external factors. I learned Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a pyramid of the social motives ranging from the biological to the individual to the social. Emotion is a state of being that we often describe as our feelings. We have a combination of emotional states that are physiological arousal, psychological appraisal, and subjective experience. My biggest takeaway from this project was using my emotions and seeing what motivation was used in each of the 4 areas: relationships, responsibilities, independence, and identity. This is because I got to learn what motivates me in college and as well as learn about what motivation is. Portfolio 6. Personality. What I learned was personality is the long-standing traits and patterns that make an individual to consistently think, feel, and behave in specific ways. Cardinal traits are those that dominate an individual's personality to the point that the individual becomes known for them. Central trait is an attribute in someone's personality that is considered particularly meaningful. Secondary traits are those that are not quite as obvious or as consistent as central traits. My biggest takeaways from this project was understanding the difference between cardinal traits, central traits, and secondary traits. These were interesting to me because I didn't know the different types of traits you could have in personality. Portfolio 7. Stress, lifestyle, and health. What I learned was stress is a variety of unpleasant feelings such as frustration, angry, conflicted, overwhelmed, or fatigued. Physiological stress can be defined as disturbing an individual's internal milieu, leading to activation of regulatory mechanisms that serve to restore homeostasis. Cognitive stress puts excessive demands on a person's thinking abilities as a result of thought. Behavioral stress is change in behavior when stressed. My biggest takeaway from this project was learning how to cope with my stress. Something that blew my mind was that stress can be healthy or not. I never knew stress could be healthy for you, and that was one of my biggest takeaways. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.